So I would like to talking about the philosophy of ancient Greece, and do you know that before the advent of Greece, the entire intellectual atmosphere of the region was just vitiated by the widespread myths, the different kind of wild imaginary poetry and religious activity, religious practices, and other things. But with the advent of these Milesian philosophers, the philosophy started to gain some ground. Okay, but the entire cognitive approach of the ancient Greece was nourished by the contributions, by the practical achievement of the Egyptian and Babylonian civilization, which is quite evident in the contributions of the Egyptians, like the invention of papyrus, the pictograms, the construction of a pyramid, sphinx, and introduction of some numerical notations like the fraction, the division, and the multiplications, and so on and so forth. They also invented a calendar. And similarly, the Babylonians also, they have invented the script of uniform astronomy. Astronomy, they have made significant progress in astronomy, and they could able to predict the first and last appearance of the Venus. They have dug certain canals for irrigation and transportation purposes. So, using these earlier works of the Egyptian and Babylonians, the ancient Greeks took an upward journey, and which is independent and free from any divine interference, and they ventured into a flight which took them to a place where the Western philosophical traditions is today. The Greeks are really they are these pioneers of free thinking. Actually, they are instrumental in making what the huge Western philosophical tradition is today. But by saying that, I don't mean that the entire development which we see around us today, that has been apprehended by the ancient Greek philosopher. But what I would like to point out that this development, what we see today in Western tradition, that was largely possible because of a certain way to look at the things, and this a certain approach to understand the things of the world. And with the Greeks, the system of inquiry, system of philosophization has gathered a momentum and gets independence from the myths, the wild imagination, and the religious practices and the poetic biases. This is quite evident in the achievement which we are going to discuss later. Primarily, there are three, we can find certain trends in ancient Greek philosophy, conceptual trends. First, there is an explicit transition from a mythical and religious atmosphere to a philosophic one. Then they rejected any supernatural interpretation, supernatural explanation of the world. Instead, they prefer a natural explanation by using certain analytical tools. So they appear to cultivate certain analytical tools and methodology which are really relevant even today. Besides that, we can find two stages in the development of ancient Greek thought. First, they are the first stage, starting from Milesians till the pre-sophistic age. The entire focus of the inquiry of the Greek philosophization was centered around the inquiry into the nature. They kept nature at the center and reduced the study of man and sociopolitical issues to a periphery. But with the appearance of Socrates and Plato, there was a U-turn in the development of the ancient Greek philosophy. Here, Plato and Aristotle, they put man at the center of their inquiry. Socio-political questions, socio-ethical political questions at the center of their inquiry. Of course, they investigate into the nature, but that is for them a secondary affair. And this approach, actually here I would like to mention another fact, that the philosophy of ancient Greek emerged out of a conviction that philosophy as a significant branch of knowledge should not confine, am I audible? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So philosophy as a significant branch of knowledge, its role should not be confined to mere record the observation of the facts, or to the interpretation of the fact, or merely to analyze them. Rather, philosophy as a significant branch of knowledge, it should have a positive role to perform. What is this positive role? That it must strive to get hold of a reasoning body of thought comprising the underlying nature and structure and subtle relations which makes a thing what it is, what makes a concept what it is. Here, analysis is not ruled out. Of course, analysis makes things clear for us, clear for our understanding. But analysis is presumed here. Okay. So this approach of philosophy has been exhibited in the ancient Greek thought. So what I will be now first discussing the first stage of Greek philosophy that was started with the Milesian philosophers, namely Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. Thales, as we know, is the first official philosopher of Western tradition. And Aristotle and Plato designated him as one of the seven sages, or one of the seven men of wisdom. Thales, he has widely traveled. He has taken extensive traveling and gained tremendous practical knowledge. So for the first time, he started to rationalize the myths given by Homer and Hesiod about the origin of this world. After making inquiry, Thales found out that there is only water is the primordial stuff out of which everything else have come out. So he accepted that there is a single element which is working behind the myriad and varieties of the things we come across in this world. So this is really a great move in the ancient philosophy. And why it is important? Here we should not get fascinated by the answer that water is the primordial stuff out of which come. Rather, the question that he asked, that really attracts our attention. Because in such an adverse atmosphere, it occurred to someone to look beyond what appears to look what is there beneath that everything we come across. So the real contribution of Thales lies in a fact that he realized that the solution to a single problem or immediate problem is not enough. To find a solution for a single problem is not enough. What we need to do, we should strive to get hold of a general principle which makes a thing what it is and which not only explain other host of things coming under that framework. So this is what philosophization, and because Greek, Greek conviction was that anything to be called philosophical, any statement to be called philosophical, it must be grounded and it must be validated. Otherwise, it cannot be called a philosophical one. So this approach was exhibited when Thales tried to give a technique for the measurement of a height. For example, this is the example which Thales has given, that suppose we want to measure the height of a pyramid. So what we do, that we can measure by a measuring rod or something like that. But what he did, he said that, look, at a particular point of time in a day, that our shadow is equal to our height. So if we measure the shadow at that particular point of time, then we can easily measure the height of that pyramid, height of a person. So this technique not only helps us to measure a particular temple or a particular pyramid, but anything that can be measurable by their height. Okay. So again, this is also evident in its contribution of the introduction of some geometrical principle that a circle can be bisected by a diameter, and if two straight lines cross each other, then the opposite triangle created by it will be equal. And in a semicircle, any angle is to be a right angle. So this is how, why I call it is a great move, because for the first time, he tried to explain certain things by grounded, or try to grounded certain things, certain statements, certain hypotheses on a general principle. But this is not a very small contribution in such an atmosphere dominated by religious practices and myths. Then came his pupil, his student, Anaximander. Anaximander is really a very very genuine student of Thales. So like all the genuine students, he didn't agree with his master Thales. He said that water cannot be the primary stock or primordial stock out of which everything has come into being. So he said that why it is not so? Because if we accept one quality, then it will devour the other qualities and makes impossible the existence of certain contrary qualities. So he said that no, yes, he agreed with his master that the principle should be one and it should be intangible and intelligible. So he came out with a hypothesis called apeiron, which can be interpreted as something boundless, indefinite, and indeterminate. Aristotle, in his metaphysics, he has raised an observation that Thales' Apeiron is just a divine one. But as a matter of fact, it is not a, if we make an analysis of the extent of Anaximander, then one can easily find that it is not really it's not really divine, because this Apeiron is not a personal God, nor it is conscious. It is rather purely mechanical. It is purely mechanical principle. So this is exhibited. This is his assertion that the entire world is a system of rotation. It is a system of rotations, objects where the objects like rock, the heavier objects like rock and stones, they fall lowest at the lowest point, and still lighter objects like water, they come still higher, and the vapor and fumes, they fall at still at a still higher level. So again, this world, when it is segregated from the Apeiron, that it is just reabsorbed into it. And this is a practice, this is repeated process, or a settling or resettling the accounts among the ingredients of the Apeiron. Now, opposite elements, he said that the contrary elements always tend to encroach upon one another, but the cosmic force maintains this balance. So this kind of thing, this kind of observation of Anaximander really is a refinement of his master's philosophical and master's thesis. His master's hypothesis actually has been refined by using certain analytical tools like consistency and compatibility, and so this notion are gradually gaining the ground, that consistency hypothesis, consistency, compatibility, and inconsistency, these concepts are growing in the writings of them. His contribution lies in giving, again, another contribution of Anaximander that I would like to mention, that he has developed a map for the first time in the history of the thought. He has developed a map of the globe. After collecting information from the travelers traveling the nook and corner of the world, he just gathered them and reproduced them in form of a globe, and which tremendously helped the travelers to travel to their place of destination. He has also invented a instrument like gnome. Gnome is an instrument by which we can measure the length of a season, the length of a year, the length of a day and night, etc., etc. So again, he has also given a theory of life, but of course that is not so comprehensive. But he said that the birth of a man cannot happen with the the survival of man cannot happen with the sudden act of birth, because the human kids needs more care and upbringing than the kids of any other animal. This possibility of survival of the human being is not possible. It's not possible by the natural means. So someone need to give birth to this man, and here he presumed that it is a fish. He says that all the living animals, they have emerged out of something like some watery elements, okay, some moist, okay. So all this discovery speaks of his greatness, realizing the importance of model and form, model and principles which can explain and grasp every individual through by relating to that principle. So this Anaximander seems to be he has applied this principle, general principle, to understand the things related to geography, astronomy, and cosmology, and the biology, etc., etc. So this is also a kind of development over the philosophization of Thales, its master. Then again, another Milesian philosopher, who happens to be the student of Anaximander, he is called Anaximenes. Anaximenes is a disciple, as you know, of the Anaximenes. He also continued his investigation into the underlying substance of the world. He also held that underlying principle is one, it should be one and infinite. Instead of saying the Aperian, he said that it is air. So he replaced the primordial stock of Anaximander, that is Aperian, by the element of air. He realized that by his teacher Anaximander did not explain the innumerable differences in the world. Actually, Anaximander hinted that there are contrary objects, there are various objects in the world, but he did not spell out properly that why and what are the mechanisms that led to these differences of various things. So he tried to bring a mechanism of condensation and rarefaction. Rarefaction and condensations are two techniques by which he tried to explain the existence of different things. As he assumed air to be the fundamental things, and air being the underlying substance, it encompasses the whole world, and including our soul, which holds us together by birth. He held that air differs in different substances in virtue of its rarefaction and condensations. So water, when it is dilated, it becomes rarer and it becomes fire. But when winds on the other hand is condensed, then it became cloud, and when cloud is condensed, it becomes water, and water is further condensed, then it becomes the stone. Thus, the addition of condensation or rarefaction makes the Milesian cosmology more logical. It shows that consistency of thought of Anaximenes by introducing a form or general principle to explain the changing pressure and temperature of the elements of the world, though he doesn't say the factors responsible for the rarefaction and condensation. He highlighted the quantitative, rather qualitative differences among the things of the world. It also exhibits some kind of physical relativism. It is an attempt to provide a purely rational account of the phenomena of the universe, relying on laws of nature by boldly rejecting the anthropomorphic gods of the Homer and Hesiod and the Egyptian Greeks. Then, after this Milesian philosophy, then came to the picture Heraclitus. With the Heraclitus, Greek philosophy is becoming more philosophical. He devoted himself to finding an explanation of the problem of birth and decay. At the outset, he was opposed to all kinds of religious practices like polytheism, idol worship, anthropomorphism, and animal sacrifice, etc. With Heraclitus, the range of criticism against the religious writer has been extended. Let me quote some extent of Heraclitus. He says that they purify themselves in vain by staining themselves with blood, just like a man who stepped into dirt and tried to wash himself with the dirt. Aristotle alleged that, like all the Ionian philosophers, the Milesian philosophers, Heraclitus is also a material monist, because he said that everything has come from fire. But all these scholars like Gumperz, Glebe, Burnet, and so on, many other Heraclitean scholars, they hold that this cosmology is a secondary, it is a peripheral issue for Heraclitus. But what is important in Heraclitus viewed that the flux theory. He said that everything is in a flux. Everything is changing. That is the hallmark of his philosophy. And he is known for that, the flux theory. It means that one can step into the river and one cannot. Why? Because river is just flowing. Once you step into the river when you return, then it is no longer the same river because the water is constantly flowing. So he said that sometimes it is river and sometimes it is not. Sometimes one is and sometimes one is not. But here, Glebe came out with a different interpretation, which is quite different, which is quite independent of this traditional interpretation of flux theory. He says that it is quite psychological in nature and directly refer to our consciousness. If it is the content of our consciousness, then we are as well as we are not. In fact, this Heraclitean doctrine implies that coming and going, taking birth and taking leave, touching each other immediately and incessantly. So Heraclitus has aptly pointed out that there is a perfect harmony. There is a perfect harmony behind all these seemingly disharmony. This hidden harmony regulates the phenomenal world. So every change occurs in accordance with a universal law upon which all the human laws are nourished. This universal law is called by Heraclitus as logos, which is nothing but a scientific account of all things. It constitutes the underlying structure of all phenomena, and it is the highest reason. It is the highest reason. So according to Heraclitus, logos pertain to be the temperate. The temperance indicate a balance and a measure. So it seems that Heraclitus has shown some willingness to rely on the sense perception, quite being aware of its contradictory nature, and believe that sense perception needs certain interpretation in the light of reason. So this is the contribution of Heraclitus. Again, after Heraclitus, there came the Pythagoreans. You know, Pythagoreans also inquired about the ultimate stop or primordial stop. They actually Pythagoras, it is not fair to call it a Pythagoras philosophy, rather better we should call it Pythagoreans. The Pythagoreans, they hold that the underlying stop is numbers. Underlying stop, that behind everything is numbers. They are talking of different kinds of numbers like odd number, even number, oblong number, rational, irrational numbers. But all the numbers are mathematical for them. You know, they say that things are number and numbers are things. When they say things are number, they mean that mathematical formula can be applied to anything for its understanding. And things are, numbers are things means to be a thing is to be number. But here there is a slight confusion, not confusion, clarification rather. The Theno, the wife of Pythagoras, she holds that Pythagoreans actually, when they say, Pythagoras say that, you know, when Pythagoras says that things are number, he actually means that that things are according numbers. Things are being there according to numbers. Okay, so they hold that on the whole Pythagorean's position is like that. The numbers are the secret of things. They unfold its true nature, and without understanding the number, the things will be blurred. They will be hazy, and this cannot give us a perfect knowledge. So what they did, the Pythagoreans, they say that look how they have applied it. You know, Pythagoreans, they have applied it. That is quite evident. They applied it in the field of health and in the field of music. Say they hold that unless you have perfect ratio or perfect balance, unless you have a ratio or proportion in just playing the chords, you cannot have the tune. So there is a proportion required, and this proportion is nothing but a mathematical proportion. And even in the health, our different organs of the body, they are if they don't work in proportion, then we cannot have a sound health. So number works at every field, and numbers gives us the exact knowledge, exact understanding of anything. So without number, things are very blurred, very hazy. Again, there then comes Democritus, another. He is called the atomist. According to him, he also inquired about the underlying nature and structure of the things of the world. He said that it is atoms. Atoms are the ultimate constituents of the things of the world. What are the atoms? He just hold the view that atoms are indivisible, and they are the latest particles. They are the last particles which cannot be divided, okay, and which is empty, which does not have any space within it. And outside atoms, they are having a free movement, and atoms are responsible. All the things we see, they are the different concatenation of the atoms. So when atoms move in the, atoms they hook each other to form. When the different atoms come together, they lead to the creation of a thing. And when they get separated, then that thing is destroyed. So in this atomic theory, Democritus has used a mechanical model to study the process of nature, and it explains the fact that nature behaves like a machine because it really is a complex machine. So here he is just indicating towards that there is a laws of nature that really works behind the happenings of the world. The atomists held that the creation, all creation, growth, decay, origination, destruction are nothing but forms of atomic combination and dissociation. They hold that everything happens for a reason and necessity, and nothing happens by chance. So the Pythagoreans just trying to assert the fact that whatever happening, it's not happening arbitrarily. It is not happening arbitrarily. It is happening with a reason and with a necessity. So this is how the atomists try to. Hello. This is how the atomists have tried to explain. The existence of different things in the world. But this is the situation. This is the cosmological inquiry that is going on in the ancient Greeks time. But after the Peloponnesian War, there is a great upheaval in the intellectual climate of the ancient Greece.
ये वो ऐसे होता है ना जो ही गलत लिखा
Please, Subhalakshmi Sahu, please, Manju Jha, would you kindly,
Yeah. Switch off your microphone. Manu, Manu, please. Switch off your microphone.
Yes, thank you. This upheaval or this disturbance was caused due to the failure of the natural philosopher to give a unanimous view on the nature of the ultimate stuff. They say, so doubt was cast in their ability.
हम क्लास
And
5
this was evident in the diversity of opinion of the natural philosophers about the nature of archive or the first principle of the world. And it was believed that the climate was further worsened by the chaotic democratic situation in the ancient world.
Manu, please kindly switch off your microphone. Manu, please kindly switch off your microphone.
Okay. So these chaotic situations actually led to the emergence of a band of philosophers, nomadic preachers rather. They are called sophists. And at this particular time, this sophist actually, a group of nomadic philosophers, they used to teach the art of argument, because in that situation, the youths were quite dissatisfied or not satisfied with the kind of natural philosophy going on in the ancient Greeks. So they wanted to get into the politics, they wanted to win election, they want to excel in management, they want to excel in administration. So for this, they need certain verbosity, certain rhetorics, which the sophists provided them, and sophists provide them, because this only work of sophists is to teach the art of argument, and they argue for the sake of argument without having any genuine concern for the truth. They say that, it is not important what we say, rather it is important how we say it. For that it requires persuasiveness of the language, your command over the vocabulary, your eloquence, and all these things. And to win an argument by dragging your opponent to a very uncomfortable situations. So this is what the sophists were doing, but For this, they are taking money. They are charging very heavily. But the philosophical defect of, philosophical shortcomings of the sophists, that they are really relativist. They are subjectives. They are never been objective. Because for them, truth is not objective. Truth is relative to time, place, and person. What is true to me may not be true to someone else. What is true today may not be true sometime else. And what is true here may not be true there at your place. So this is the sophist, the defect of the sophist argument. So actually, they employ a technique called dosi-logi. Suppose this is the technique of argument, how to win an argument. So suppose I argue that X is P. At the same time, I will argue I must learn to argue that X is not Y, and I will be able to argue it with equal force, like X is P. So they teach the art of argument without having any genuine concern of truth. But this has actually misguided the youth of the contemporary Greeks. So Socrates came to, and he was very dissatisfied with the Socrates, but he told that, okay, Socrates using those arguments, fine. And Socrates said that truth is the ultimate, requirement in philosophy. Without truth, without the search of truth, without the understanding of truth, no philosophy can take place. No act of philosophization can take place. So he wanted to have to go for a conceptual knowledge. Actually, we don't know much about Socrates because he has not left anything. He has not left anything for us to give any authentic views of Socrates. Whatever we know about Socrates, we know about Socrates from the writings of Plato and Aristotle to some extent. When Plato was a very sincere student of Socrates. So whatever Socrates has said, that has been reflected in Plato's philosophy, particularly in his earlier dialogues. Plato was very much, influenced by his predecessors, particularly the natural philosophers, and he believed firmly that we can understand the things, whatever it is, only by grounding it on some general principles, and by using those analytic techniques like use of hypothesis, use of consistency, inconsistency, causation, and other verification, generalization, all those techniques that have been used by the natural philosophy that are really very, very important for Plato, and Plato was very much influenced by them. Plato says all these techniques, they prove as much a challenge as a stimulus for Plato to develop his own philosophy. But the question is that Plato was quite dissatisfied with the ways the natural philosophers were doing, because he believed that natural philosophers neglected the nature, the study of man. After all, he says, why are you inquiring things? Why are you doing all this inquiry and all this philosophy, unless it serves the purpose of mankind? So he says that it is our duty to understand, because the natural philosophers, they are partial in their approach. So Plato wanted to fill this gap by undertaking an inquiry into the nature of man, into the socio-ethical political questions and the relation of individual to state. So he wanted to bring the study of nature, man, and society into an integrated framework. Actually, this is the program of his masters, and Plato worked it out to its logical conclusion. Plato says that, yes, Plato, his program is to give a theory of truth for the normative judgments. Plato was aware of the relative difficulties of this these activities of this program, but why? No, the difficulty is that if you are asked to say what is the height of this table, then you can easily put a measuring rod and you can measure it. But when you are asked to say how much good you are, how much right you are in your behavior or conduct, so that is where we get the problem. So Plato says that it is okay, it is a difficult task, but it is not impossible. And he tried to find out what are the ways how to have a proper exact understanding of the normative concepts. He says that Plato was inspired by the Socrates, as I have told you earlier, that he says that you have enough talent and skill. A man can have enough talent and skill, but he cannot transmit his skill to others unless he has a technique, he has a principle to transmit it. So here the man who here there is a distinction. He brought a distinction between arts and science, episteme. Okay, arts is the man who has a talent, skills. He has the arts, but the man who tries to know, who knows really the principles, the underlying principle or nature of a particular thing, then he has the science, he has the episteme, he doesn't have the opinion. Persons who has practical knowledge, he has the opinion, but not the episteme. So he wanted to bridge the gap between episteme and this opinion. So he tried to find out what are the principles that makes what are the principles that really makes a thing what it is. And here Plato, as I told that Plato was deeply influenced by this approach by a general principle involving extensive use of the technical tools given by his work. So in that story, Plato, in his inquiry actually, Plato first tried to say that these principles are nothing but forms. These principles are nothing but forms. Forms. But how to get hold of this form? That is really the problem of Plato. He says that forms cannot be arrived at or cannot be got hold of by merely by rhetorics, or he devised certain methods. He devised certain methods to get at the forms. So the methods Plato has used actually of three kinds. Three original methods Plato has devised. One is method of Elenchus, which is purely a Socratic method. Another method is method of hypothesis. That is also sometimes it is also Socratic methods. And later Plato himself added a method that is called a method of collection and division. And apart from all these methods, he has also a special method called dialectic. And first let us talk about this method of Elenchus. So it is this method of Elenchus, that is called Socratic method of Elenchus or Elentic methods. It examines the statement of a person by putting a series of questions, by putting a series of questions to elicit further statements which would determine the truth of the earlier statement. It involves it has following steps. Let me, had it been the, PowerPoint, I would have been explaining in a better way. But still, Socrates wants to refute a widely, suppose Socrates wants to refute a thesis, because at that time the sophists were, very popular, and Socrates thought that they are misguiding the youth. So how to expose their ignorance? So Socrates adopted a method that is called eloquent method. Suppose he wanted to reject a thesis, assert a thesis P, which held by the interlocutor with whom he is arguing. Suppose the sophist, who is supposed to be very well informed and claim that he has expert knowledge in that field. So Socrates asserts another thesis, Q and R. He will bring another thesis, Q and R, and which has been completely endorsed by his opposite party or his interlocutor. So Socrates goes on derive consequences from this supposed hypothesis, supposed thesis Q and R, and the interlocutor is given absolute liberty here to put forward his objection, if any, to these consequences. So जो consequence जो derive करे प्लेटो से Socrates through से Socrates will just give absolute liberty to his opponents to reject or accept this. If they reject the hypothesis which Socrates has brought into, then the Socrates will change the hypothesis. That is, he will change it to Q and S. And from Q and S, he will go on deriving a thesis that is not P. So if not P is true, because it is derived from a true proposition as accepted by its opponent, then P is false. So this is how he tried to reject, he tried to expose the ignorance of sophists. And once you get rid of this ignorance, you can actually have a platform to understand, to go for the discovery of the forms. Then we come across another method, that is method of hypothesis. Here I will just quote Plato from his book Phaedo. It is in the passage 100a-e. Phaedo is a dialogue written by Plato. So he says, it is on this path, I'm quoting, it is on this path I set out, on each occasion I assume the proposition which I judge to be the soundest, and I put down as true whatever agrees with it, and whatever doesn't agree with it, I will just reject it as the false. If anyone casts a doubt on the hypothesis, you assume a more general hypothesis and carry out on this process till you reach something satisfactory. Here you underline the word something satisfactory. Let me explain the methods by giving a concrete example. Suppose I want to, suppose Socrates want to, define what beauty is. It is the example of Plato, which is given in the in his dialogue Phaedo. Suppose you want, how can you define beautiful? You take a hypothesis which you feel that it is the best hypothesis, which you judge to be the soundest one. You say that its color and complexion is the principle by which you can say that it is beautiful. But another person will come out with certain things that, look, here is another thing having the same color, same structure. It is not beautiful. So he assumed another higher hypothesis, that not only color and its appearance, but something else that is its structure. I mean, structure, interval structure is, so then he goes on derive consequences from it. So this process will go on till one arrives at a particular principle of beauty, which is really defines necessarily and sufficiently what beauty is. Okay, this is how he has started this method of hypothesis. Again, we come across another method, that is method of connection and division. And this method is actually method of collection and division. It aims at defining a form. It tries to define what a form should be by discerning a common element in all its diverse instances and articulating a formula that is specific enough and adequate enough to distinguish it from the rest of the things. So apart from defining form, this method, suppose let us take an example, Theaetetus flies and Theaetetus sits. Here the form, the necessary sufficient condition of Theaetetus is compatible with the sitting. The concept of sitting and its necessary sufficient, they are compatible with each other. So they can go together and they can give a knowledge, epistemic. But if I say Theaetetus flies or the table eats, then they cannot go together. So method of collection and division is not only delineates the necessary and sufficient condition of a form which explains a thing of which it is a form. Not only this, it also divides a technique how different forms are to be combined and to be separated. And apart from all these methods, there is another method which is very popular and which has been has a greatest influence in the contemporary philosophy, that is called dialectic method. In fact, Plato has never given a systematic view of dialectic, systematic exposition of what dialectic is. But from these sporadic remarks he has made in different dialogues, we can see that this method is nothing but the amalgamation of all these three methods, that is method of Elenchus, method of hypothesis, and method of collection and differences. So form, it is an okay. Then despite all the different, because the forms, the method of Elenchus, it states what form is not. And it prepares a way for getting at forms. And hypothesis, method of hypothesis, just gives us a technique that how a particular thing can be understood by relating it to a highest form, which is beyond all questions, which is irrefutable. That is actually the highest that Plato would call, that is the highest form and form of good. So anything in order to be properly comprehensible, properly understandable, it has got to be related with the ultimate form, the highest form, that is the form of good. So despite these differences, all these methods strive to discover forms, which is the hallmark of Plato's philosophy. Because Plato's philosophy without the notion or concept of form is really incomplete. One can find many conflicting views about the forms even given by Plato in his different dialogues, because sometimes he says form is one, sometimes he says form is many, sometimes he says that form is physical, sometimes he calls it spiritual. All these differences All these criticisms implicitly indicate that the forms have a different perspective than what it seems at the first sight. This is evident when he says through the mouth of Parmenides that if we admit form in every case, we will have nothing. If we don't admit the forms, then we have nothing to found our, to base our discourse. So it will destroy all kinds of discourse altogether. Thus, despite the individual differences, all the Platonic scholars share a common view that forms are there. Forms cannot be denied. Forms are there, and forms are objective. They are not one for you, one for me, or one here or there. Forms are objective. Forms are fixed. They are self-abiding, and they are beyond spatio-temporal relation. Okay, they embody the necessary and sufficient condition which makes a thing what it is. So from the above discussion, it appears that Plato had used this form in the sense of theory, and the search for form has occupied him throughout his philosophical career. So, and the search of form can be, again, this search of form can be identified with a search of theory. Traditionally, what happens, the theory of forms, it has been seen in a very metaphysical point of view. But here, I personally feel, and I have worked it out, that it can, apart from its metaphysical, I am not denying that it's a metaphysical, but if we take form in its epistemic sense, then it is quite similar to that of a theory, which are really lies at the scientific and philosophical investigation. So forms can be identified with the search of theory. It is also evident from the fact that forms are considered as a mode of explanations. Theory also explains, form also explains. Theory also discovers the real nature of things, form also discovers the real nature of things. In fact, Plato's, since theories are also beyond spatio-temporal relation, and form are also beyond spatio-temporal relation. And theories are objective, forms are also equally objective. So there is no, with a reasonable argument, one can hold that theories, the forms of Plato can be understood in the sense of a theory. If we understand forms in the sense of theory, then one can hold without a reasonable doubt that Plato has laid the foundation of science. But since Plato has kept man, his primary job and his primary objective is to understand the nature of man, So his philosophical enterprise may imply to a thesis that he is founder of a kind of human science, or whatever we may also call it a social science. But forms, Plato has used this form in the sense of theory because he has not used it. He has not used the form in a fantastical explanation or a religious worldview. He has used it perfectly in epistemic sense. So he really is the founder of human science. So what I want to say that the entire philosophical atmosphere, philosophical enterprise of ancient Greek are instrumental in making the huge Western philosophy what it is today. And their inquiry and Greeks and philosophy has got a solid foundation with these attempts, and philosophy can be pursued. Philosophy can be pursued. Philosophy can be. Just a minute. Philosophy can be pursued not arbitrarily. It can be pursued systematically by discovering certain general principles, and of course with using which can be the principle can be arrived at by using certain analytical tools. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Now the topic is open for discussion. Yes. Any questions? Yeah. Any questions? Anybody wants to say anything about the topic? They need some clarification, then they can ask to our speaker. Yeah. Going, sir. Now Dungul sir is going to ask you something.
What? Pardon?
Dungul sir had a question and
yes.
he is putting a question.
Yes. You're most welcome, sir.
Sir, I do say you are not comfortable in comparison to this physical class. Isn't it like that also? I don't feel like. So I have one question, by the way. As you were in Athens, Greece, and you must have experience or come across or come in contact with the philosophers of present day in either Greece or Athens. What difference do you find or have you noticed comparatively that of Odisha and India? Is there any still philosophical temperament or environment which our ancient Greek philosophers had? Is it still there?
Yes. Yes, it is very much there, sir. It is in India because, both the civilization, Indian civilization and Greek civilization, they grew independently. Now they grew parallel to each other without being influenced by each other. Sir, hello? Hello, am I audible, sir?
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. So both the cultures, they grew parallelly without being influenced by each other. But there are some similarity, many similarities between the development of Indian philosophy, and I'm not talking of Origin philosophy. There's not enough work has been done in this regard. But as far as Indian philosophy is concerned, there are much similarity between them. If you go through the Nyaya philosophy, its its primary purpose, it is a realistic philosophy, as we know, that it has a technique of Uddeshya Lakshana and Pariksha. First, you have to define what is your objective, what is the problem you are going to discuss. Then you just Lakshana. Then you have to characterize it. Then you have to examine it. So ultimately, this leads us to just check out a kind of principle, general principles, which helps us in understanding the things which we want to inquire about. So there are evidences. There are evidences in Nyaya, even in Vedantic philosophy also. There are ample scope of analyzing these things, and although the Vedantic appears to be usually metaphysical, usually religious, yet it has certain elements which we can hope that it is also based on certain principles. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
In Odisha, as I have told you, not enough work has been done. Odishan philosophy like Mahima Dharma and Vaishnavajism of Odisha, not enough work is done in this regard to spell out very adequately what is this kind of inquiry and how it is very close to the inquiry of Greek philosophers, or for that matter, the Nyaya philosophers.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Anybody else wants to ask any questions or need any clarification from our speaker?
Hales philosophy. Can I?
Oh, sure, you are welcome.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir. So I have a
Okay.
question that why Hales says that, or according to him, according to Thales, water is a source of everything. Why?
What is the source of?
Water is source of everything. Why?
Yes, yes. Actually, Thales started to inquire, but before the advent of Thales, the Greek atmosphere was completely dominated, the intellectual atmosphere particularly, completely dominated by, myths of Homer and Hesiod. And religious practices are so rampant that you cannot think of anything. You cannot think of anything without depending on the religious principle, religious activity, or religious theory, or religious assertions. So it is a great compliment to Thales. It is a great move made by Thales that he was the first person. He was the first person to look behind, to give a rational.
मैडम कई जन मोबाइल पाखरे आउ गोटे डिवाइस रखी से ये आवाज आती प्लीज मोबाइल बाहर कर दिखाई ठीक
है. So Thales' move was quite significant because in such a adverse atmosphere, it occurred to him to look behind the appearance of the thing, look behind the things of the world, that what is responsible what is responsible for all these things to come into existence. So he just came out that water is the ultimate source, because all the things have some moist elements. So he told that water is the source. So here, it is not a very great answer. Keeping the modern developments in philosophy and science, but don't go by the questions. Don't get carried away by the don't take the question literally. But what attracts our attention here, what is more important, that the questions. The more important is the question he has asked. Only by questioning you can come to a right answer, proper question. So he was the person who opened the way for the explanation of the world and other things. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, welcome.
Yes, anybody else wants to ask anything? Please feel free to ask questions. Don't hesitate, please.
Please, you are most welcome.
Yeah.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, what is the origin of Greek philosophy?
Origin, I have told you, the Greek philosophy actually started with this. Origin is started with the philosophy started with the philosophers, you know. So philosophy started in Greeks with the advent, with the coming of these Milesian philosophers, namely Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. They tried to explain, they tried to define what philosophy should be and how philosophy would be helpful for us to understand this structure of the world. So these are three persons. They are you may say that the founder of this Milesian philosopher comprising of Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes as the founder of Western philosophy. Greek philosophy.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. Anybody else? Feel free to ask questions. Be comfortable in asking questions. अरे कोई भी लैंग्वेज में पूछो, सर एंटरटेन करेंगे. ओडिया, हिंदी, इंग्लिश. या ପିଲାମାନେ ପଚାର କ୍ୱେଶ୍ଚିନ୍, ଲାଜ କରନି.
ଲାଙ୍ଗୁଏଜ ଟା ପ୍ରୋବ୍ଲେମ ନୁହେଁ, ଯୋଉଥିରେ ପଚାରି ପାରିବ.
या ସାର୍ ବି କନସେଣ୍ଟ ଦେଇଦେଲେ, ଲାଙ୍ଗୁଏଜ ଇଜ ନଟ୍ ପ୍ରୋବ୍ଲେମ. ସୋ ଯୋଉ ଭାଷାରେ ତମେ କମ୍ଫର୍ଟେବଲ ଫିଲ୍ କରୁଛ କ୍ୱେଶ୍ଚିନ୍ ପଚାର.
Even I can answer in Greeks if someone knows Greeks.
Students, any question from student side? पूछो बच्चों, प्लीज पूछो. सर कितने अच्छे से बोले ग्रीक फिलोसफी के बारे में, थेल्स के बारे में, एनाक्साइमेंडर, एनाक्सिमेनीज, पिथागोरस, हेराक्लिटस, सोक्रेटिस, प्लेटो. जो भी मन में आ रहा है, जो भी आप समझे हो, जो भी कुछ पूछना चाहते हो, फ्री फील, आप खुशी से पूछो बिना कोई झिझक के. आस्क क्वेश्चंस प्लीज. It is for your benefit only.
Sir, I have a question that Thales gave the idea that everything is based on water.
Yes.
Sir, so what is the real significance of or meaning of that?
Perhaps you have missed what I said. He said that water is the primordial or the primary stuff out of which everything has come out. This is not a very acceptable to the modern mind. Okay, he told it with the evidence that everything, he feels that everything has some moist, everything having some moist element. Everything you come across in the world have some moist element. So water, he presumed water to be the source of everything. But earlier I have said, don't go by the answer. But what is more important about the questions? That question really opened the development of the evolution of Greek philosophy.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Any question from student side?
Sir, I have a question.
Oh, sure.
What is the opinion of Democritus in Greek philosophy?
Opinion. Democritus has tried to, all the ancient Greek philosophers, particularly this natural philosopher, this cosmologists, they tried to inquire about the ultimate stuff out of which everything has come out. So in his attempt, Democritus said that the ultimate stuff is atoms. Atoms, is because there are various forms. The nature of atoms, it is the invisible. It is invisible. Of course, it is invisible to naked eyes. It is indivisible. It cannot be divided further. Okay, but their shape and size is different, and they have a tendency. They move freely in the empty space, and they have a tendency to hook each other. Okay, when they come together, a thing is created, and whether they get separated, then the thing is destroyed. So this is how he has tried to explain the coming of things and their coming into being of the things and their destruction. And this process of destruction, this process of coming together and getting separate, it is not arbitrary. It is not arbitrary. It is really it is happening by a necessity, by a law. Okay, so this is what is the contribution of the atomist. Yes, Rohidas, you were asking something. I could not read it out. Please, Rasmi Madam, please read out what Rohidas wrote. Sachin Babu, sorry. Sachin Babu is telling. Yes. It is a statement, famous statement given by Protagoras. Protagoras is a sophist, and the tendency of sophist to give certain relative statements, subjective statements. Okay, so he says that if man is whatever I says, that is true for me. Whatever you say, that is true for you. So I am the measure. I will decide what is truth and what is false. This is the implication of Protagoras. Man he can measure everything. Okay. It is really it is subjectivism. It is really subjectivism and relativism. Okay. So of course this has been amply repudiated by Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle later. But this is how Protagoras tried to mean by man is the measure of everything. It is a relativistic statement and subjective statement, not an objective one, and it doesn't concern about the truth, because they feel that there is no truth existing in this year. No objective truth is there. Everything is true. Okay.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Good noon, sir. I am based in Manan from GM University. Actually, I have a question, but it is not a question. I want to know about this topic. Actually, Thales was a Greek philosopher. He was seven sages.
Pardon, who is the Greek philosopher? Who?
Sir, Thales.
Huh?
Hello.
Yes. Yes.
Of the seven sages of Greece. Very well. And Thales' philosophy considered of two propositions. Firstly, that water is the principle of everything.
Yes.
That everything comes from water and everything return back to it. This water.
Yes.
But secondly, he said that the earth is a flat dish which floats upon water. So this second proposition I have to understand.
Yes, I understand. Yes. Thales also has an opinion that it floats. It is like a disc floating in the water. But this is a very hyperbole, and this is a very, it is, he has said by way of, very lighter statement. But actually what he means that all the things contain certain moist elements, watery elements. Everything you find in this world, So from this, he concludes that water is the ultimate stuff, ultimate thing, ultimate substance out of which everything has come out. Not that actually he has given this statement. That's why he has been criticized by Aristotle. But how could it be? But this is a lighter statement. This statement should not be taken seriously by the scholars of Thales.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Bhastya, કેમતે અછો?
Very fine, sir. And you?
Yes. Another question is Sachin. Virtue is knowledge. Okay.
Okay.
Sachin, you want to ask this now? Virtue is knowledge. Hello. Sachin, you want to, yes. Virtue is knowledge. You know, Socrates is not a natural philosopher. He was also dissatisfied with natural philosophy. So he wanted to concentrate on some ethical questions related to the behavior of human being in a society. So his primary focus is to understand these ethical concepts. Okay. So he says, what is knowledge? Knowledge is not relative. Knowledge should be understood by concepts. For example, let me give one instance that has been depicted in Theaetetus. When Theaetetus, there was an academy of Plato, and Theaetetus was a very sincere student of mathematics in his academy. Socrates goes on conversations with different students. It is Socrates, it is Plato actually. Socrates was a protagonist in that book. The book was written in form of the dialogues. Socrates, actually it is Plato's version. Socrates says that you tell me what is knowledge. Then Theaetetus counted all these things: geography, geometry, astronomy, etc., blah blah. So, but Socrates immediately pointed out, no, I am not asking you the examples of the knowledge, examples of different kinds of knowledge. I am asking you to say what knowledge is. Then he says that knowledge is opinion. But then he says that knowledge is opinion. How can this is my opinion, and the opinions are always subjective, and knowledge cannot be subjective. Okay, knowledge should be objective. Then he comes out with another thing that is it opinion plus an account? Then he says no. Even a student just get it by heart. The different in a deduction. There are certain steps. So students, as a student, suppose he got it by heart, all the steps, and says that, yes, this is the account, but here he does not have the knowledge. So knowledge is something to be grounded on a principle. So also virtue. Virtue means the ethical concept which Socrates was trying to understand, trying to explain. And that similarly, virtue should be understood in forms in the way as we investigate knowledge. So that is why he holds that virtue is also knowledge. Virtue cannot be subjective. It cannot be relative. Okay? Because if you understand virtue in its relative, of course, today there are a lot of people doing the applied philosophy here and there. But he says that unless, he has given an example, that unless we have a concept of beauty or anything or honesty, how can we say that he is more honest, he is less honest? The more and less cannot be easily defined. Okay, so that is why he said virtue should be understood in the same way as we understand knowledge. So virtue is knowledge. Pramod kଣ କହୁଥିଲ? Hello.
Sir, may I ask something?
Oh, sure.
Sir, according to Socrates, only virtue is knowledge. या फिर only virtue is knowledge, or another knowledge is also knowledge, means virtue is included in the knowledge.
Yes, like what he means that the way you understand knowledge, okay? Because something, when I claim that I know P, I must know that how P is to be grounded in a principle, how P is to be validated, okay? So we have to understand virtue in this sense. Unless you have certain principle to explain what is honesty, you cannot say that he is more honest, he is less honest. Okay, this is what he means when Socrates says that this virtue is knowledge.
Yes, sir. Sir, what was the dialectic method of Socrates?
Yes, Socrates' dialectic method, actually dialectic method was just emerging. Socrates, actually Plato has given it a concrete step. Socrates' method, I said that the method of Elancus, okay? I have explained this method of Elancus or Elentic method, which is called Socratic dialectic. That is a question answer method. Suppose you want to refute a thesis P, as I have told you earlier, because Plato, Socrates wanted to rebuke all these sophistic assertions, because sophistic assertions are based on relativity and subjectivity. But according to Plato, knowledge cannot be subjective or relative. It has got to be objective. Okay. So in this sense, he says that virtues are to be you tell the question again. I got disturbed by the telephone. Just tell me another. Urmi, repeat your question, please.
Sir, I was asking about dialectic method of Socrates.
Oh yes, dialectic. Yes, dialectic. Dialectic means a question answer. For Socrates, dialectic means a question answer. So he put you a question. Suppose you want to establish a thesis P, or you want to reject. Actually, it is a method of rejection, method of election or dialectic. First, it is a method of rejection. How he will reject it? Suppose there is a thesis P given by a sophist. He wants to reject this thesis. He will bring another thesis, which is very popular and it is a proven thesis that is upheld by everybody. Okay, so from this he tries to derive certain consequences. If the consequences are not accepted by the interlocutor, by the opponent, the thesis of whom he is going to reject, then if the opponent doesn't accept that consequences, he is having certain problem with the consequences, then he will change the hypothesis, further hypothesis, and this process which goes on till the interlocutor, till the opponent accept completely the thesis. So that thesis is Q and S. And again, Socrates will derive consequences from Q and S. And from Q and S, he will derive that not P. And the contradiction of the original thesis P. Okay, original thesis P. Okay, so if not P is true because it is derived from a true proposition, then obviously P is false. So in this way, this way called Socratic. In this way, Socrates tried to reject the method. This dialectic. This is called Socratic dialectic. But dialectic has some other purpose, and it has been given a very concrete form by Plato by introducing other methods like method of hypothesis and method of collection and division. This is what we are.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Sir, what is the salient features of Greek philosophy?
Salient features.
Yes, sir.
I told you the salient features of Greek philosophy. Actually, Greek philosophy salient features first. They tried to explain everything by discovering a general principle first. And they discover it without any religious biases, any poetic biases, any poetic biases or mythical biases. So they wanted to give a rational explanation by replacing the religious explanation. Okay, so they inquire into things independently. They are the spirit. This is the spirit of free inquiry. They are the pioneers. They are the pioneers of the spirit of free inquiry. Okay, so these are the certain things, and salient features. There are two stages of development of Greek philosophy. One is natural philosophy. The other is the human philosophy. One natural philosophy and the cosmologists, the natural philosopher, they put nature at the center of their inquiry or their philosophization. On the other hand, in the other stage of development, which is started by Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and some other philosophers, they put man at the center because they believe that any inquiry into the nature of the world will be incomplete unless we direct it, we harness it with the uses or purpose of man or mankind. So these are certain things that are the real features of the Greek philosophy.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
So somebody has asked you, what is flux theory?
Flux theory. This is actually a very famous Heraclitean theory. He says that flux means changing. Everything is changing. Okay? There is a birth, growth, decay. So everything is succeeding one another. The flux theory actually, he has given an example, as I have told, that you cannot cross the same river twice. Okay? Because the moment you step into the river, this will become a different river. Because the water which you have crossed earlier is now flowing, has flown down, and some other waters, they took its place. But at the same time, he says that what he implies by it, that you look, this is one from one angle, and this is the same thing is also different from another angle. Okay, so everything is there is a disharmony, there is a harmony, but there is a harmony. Everything that appears to be disharmonious. So this is what he wanted to convey by his theory of flux or theory of change.
Sir, what is the essence of ancient Greek philosophy?
What is the
essence of ancient Greek philosophy?
I have answered it earlier. Greek philosophy. Greek philosophy's answer is just to give a rational explanation of everything by the help of certain general principle with which I arrived with the help of certain analytical tools like hypothesis, conjectures, verifications, and consistency, inconsistency, compatibility, and all these analytical. So this is the essence of Greek philosophy.
Thank you, sir.
Anybody else?
Someone is asking about the soul of the, is not it?
Yeah,
Who is there asking about that? Soul?
this Kita. Who is this?
Who is asking?
Yeah,
I am Besti, sir. I am asking.
yeah.
Oh,
Who
that's good. Acha. Plato, actually Plato has admitted, yes, there is soul. Soul is also immortal. There is soul. But this soul has, three parts. One is rational part, another is courageous part, and third one is it's appetite part. So these three parts are there in every soul. Sometimes the rational part dominates the other two. Sometimes the courage part dominates the other two. Sometimes even the appetite part dominates the other. So why he is giving this? Why he is giving this? He said that the nature of a man could be determined by the amount of, that is determined by the dominance of one quality over the others. Suppose in a person where his rational part is dominated, then he will be a part of governance, or he will be what calls a philosopher king. And if the courage part is dominating the other two, then he will be there as a soldier. He will be there as a soldier who will protect the state from external aggression and internal squabbles. And if the appetite part is dominating the other two, then he will be a manual worker. Like he will be cultivating, he will be a cultivator, and other manual work will be done by these people to serve the purpose of the other two classes of people. So this is how Plato explained his theory of soul. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I have also another question, sir. What is the basic?
Sure.
What is the basic aim of Plato's dialectic process? Please explain.
Yes, very good. Yes. Dialectic, actually the purpose of dialectic is to discover form. Okay? Form constitutes the necessary and sufficient condition of which it is a form. Okay? So dialectic first purpose is to discover the form and work its way to the highest form good. Because any virtues, any ethical qualities or political qualities, unless it is related to the highest form good, it is not completely comprehensible. So dialectic not only discovers a form, but it works it way back to the highest form, which make all the forms, comprehensible and understandable. Okay, and not only this, dialectic it gives a technique how different forms are to be combined and separated. Okay, so these are the three objectives of Platonic dialectic. But unfortunately, Plato has not given a very systematic exposition of dialectic in any of his 30 dialogues. But his sporadic, his comments here are there in other dialogues that can convince one, that can make us reasonably make us to reasonably hold that these are the three important purposes of the dialectic, and which can be fulfilled by this Eleatic method and this method of hypothesis and the method of collection and division. So this dialectic is an amalgamation of all these methods to just achieve its objective of discovering forms, working its way back to the highest form, and to devise a technique how different forms are combined and separated.
Thank you, sir.
I think that we shall now put an end to this discussion, otherwise it will continue up to 5. So now I request Dung Dung sir to say few words and propose vote of thanks.
Yes.